The man had lived a life that very few could even imagine. For decades, he had served in one of the most elite military units in the world, taking on missions that were whispered about in classified reports and never made it to the news. To the outside world, he was invisible, a ghost among ghosts. But after years of danger, after seeing things most people could never picture, he had made a choice. He wanted peace. He wanted quiet. He wanted a life where the only battles he faced were the ones inside his own mind. He settled in a small town, one that wasn't on most maps and didn't attract attention. It had quiet streets lined with trees that swayed gently with the wind, houses that looked like they had been there for decades, and neighbors who kept to themselves. The man found comfort in the ordinary rhythm of life that the town offered. Morning walks, evenings on the porch, the smell of fresh bread from the local bakery. This was a life he never thought he would have. It was a life he had earned, and he guarded it fiercely. The only companion he allowed into this world of calm was his dog. The dog was more than just a pet. It was a partner, a confidant, and a protector. He had trained the dog himself, and together they shared a bond that went beyond words. The dog had been with him through deployments, through missions that demanded everything from courage to patience, through nights that were long and filled with tension. This dog knew him in ways no other could, sensing moods, responding to signals, and always staying one step ahead to protect him. Now in the quiet of this small town, the dog was his anchor to a past he could not fully leave behind. Every morning without fail, they walked together. The man would put on his jacket, leash the dog, and head out before the sun fully woke the town. They would stroll down the narrow roads, past houses where people were just beginning to stir, past small gardens that smelled of morning dew and flowers, past the old general store where the owner would wave as they passed. It was a simple routine, but for the man it was everything. The world had once been loud and dangerous, filled with sounds of chaos and tension. Now each footstep on the pavement was a reminder that he could breathe again. The townspeople saw only a quiet man and his loyal dog. They didn't know about the missions that had taken him to deserts, jungles, and mountains far away. They didn't know about the nights when the man had stared at the ceiling in barracks far from home, haunted by the faces of people he could not save. To them, he was just a neighbor who kept to himself, who nodded politely, who returned mail on time. But for the man, this life was a delicate balance. One wrong word, one moment of carelessness, and the shadows of his past could catch up to him. He had learned to walk quietly, to speak sparingly, to keep the world at a careful distance. Despite this, the man was not lonely. The dog filled the spaces that humans often could not. When he returned from the market or from errands, the dog would greet him with a tail wag and a look that said everything without saying a word. The bond they shared was built on trust, on experience, on countless hours spent together in life or death situations. Here in the quiet town, it was simply love. The dog's eyes would follow him around the house, always alert, always protective, and the man would find comfort in that presence. It was a comfort he didn't think he deserved, but one he accepted because it was honest. In the afternoons, he would sometimes sit on the porch, the dog resting at his feet, and watch the world go by. Children would ride bikes, neighbors would water their gardens, the breeze would carry the distant sounds of life. He never joined in, but he observed, and he found peace in it. The world could continue. People could live their ordinary lives, and he could remain a quiet guardian at the edges. It was a strange kind of happiness, one that came from knowing that he could finally allow himself to exist without constantly reacting to danger. It was new and fragile, and he treated it like the rare treasure it was. Every so often, the past would make a quiet knock at his door. A news report about conflicts overseas, a fellow veteran passing through town, a sudden memory of a mission that had gone wrong. Each time the dog would sense his unease. The dog would step closer, nuzzle him, rest its head on his knee as if to say, "You are safe now." And in those moments, he would remember that despite everything he had seen, he had survived and he was not alone. The dog was proof of both. They had both survived and they had each other. The townspeople never guessed the truth. They never asked about the scars, the quiet confidence, the precise way he moved, the eyes that seemed to see too much. They saw only a man who kept to himself and a dog that seemed unusually intelligent and well-behaved. And in many ways, that was exactly how he wanted it. The past was a shadow, and shadows were easier to live with when no one shone a light directly on them. The man also found solace in small routines. He would read quietly in the evenings, cook meals that were simple but nourishing, and make sure the dog had everything it needed. There was a rhythm to this life, a gentle cadence that he had not known in years. It was healing. Every morning walk, every evening on the porch, every small interaction with the few people he allowed into his life reinforced that he was alive, that he could feel, and that he could still care. The dog was central to all of this, a living reminder of loyalty, love, and resilience. On weekends, he would sometimes take the dog out to the nearby woods. They would wander along trails that were quiet and mostly forgotten, the sounds of leaves underfoot, birds in the trees, and the gentle rush of a stream nearby. He had spent years operating in jungles, deserts, and mountains, but here, the woods felt different. There was no mission, no threat, no enemy. Just life, simple and unhurried. The dog would bound ahead, then return, always attentive, always protective, and he would watch with a mixture of pride and gratitude. These were the moments that reminded him of what truly mattered. He rarely spoke of his past. Occasionally, someone would ask what he did before moving to the town, and he would give vague answers. "I worked in logistics," he would say, or "I traveled a lot." It was enough to satisfy curiosity without revealing too much. He had learned long ago that too many words could lead to questions that had no answers, to explanations that were dangerous, to attention he didn't want. The dog was the one who understood fully. The dog had seen it all, and that was enough. Even as he embraced this quiet life, he remained alert. Years in Delta Force had trained him to notice details, to sense danger, to react swiftly. He could not turn that off even if he wanted to. Every sound outside the house, every stranger walking down the street, every unusual movement made him pause, evaluate, and sometimes take action. But he did so quietly, without alarming anyone. The dog shared this instinct, a silent partner ready to act if needed. Together they were a small, formidable team, invisible yet powerful in ways the world around them could not comprehend. One particular evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, he sat on the porch with the dog lying across his lap. He thought about how far he had come, from a world of chaos and conflict to this peaceful existence. He remembered the missions that had pushed him to his limits, the decisions that had weighed heavily on him, the loss and pain he had witnessed, and yet here he was, alive, with a dog that had never left his side. It was a rare kind of peace, one earned through sacrifice and resilience. He knew that life in this small town was temporary in some ways, that the past could always catch up. But for now he allowed himself to enjoy it, the gentle wind, the rustle of leaves, the quiet companionship of his dog. These were treasures he would never take for granted. The bond they shared was a lifeline, a connection to both the past and the present, a reminder that loyalty and love could exist even in the shadows of a life that had seen too much. As night fell, the man went inside, the dog following closely. He prepared a simple dinner, then settled into a chair with a book. The dog curled at his feet, eyes half closed but alert. The world outside was calm, the town asleep, and for the first time in many years he felt a sense of belonging. Not to the missions he had once undertaken, not to the places he had traveled, not to the battles fought in secrecy, but to the quiet, ordinary life he had carved out for himself. And he knew that as long as the dog was by his side, he could face whatever came next, even if he never shared his true story with anyone else. The nights were long and quiet, but not lonely. He could hear the dog's steady breathing, feel its warmth, and he was reminded that he was not alone. In a world that had demanded so much of him, this small life, these simple routines, and this loyal companion were more than enough. It was a life built on resilience, on quiet courage, on love that did not need words to be understood. In the heart of the small town, unnoticed by most, a man who had once been a legend in shadows was living a quiet life with a dog that had been his partner through everything. They walked together, they rested together, they survived together. And though the world did not know their story, it did not matter. For in the stillness, in the ordinary, in the bond between a man and his dog, there was a kind of heroism that no one could see but those who lived it. And for the man, that was enough. The morning started like any other. The man and his dog walked down the familiar streets of the town, the sun just rising and casting a golden glow over the quiet houses. The air was fresh, and for a moment everything felt normal, just like it always did. The dog trotted happily beside him, sniffing the air and occasionally looking back with a glance that seemed to say, "Everything is fine." The man smiled softly, enjoying the simple joy of seeing his companion so full of life. But that ordinary day was about to change. From a distance, the faint sound of sirens cut through the morning calm. The man noticed them immediately, a reflex from years of training. Something in his gut told him that today, this peace could be broken. He tried to ignore it at first, thinking it might just be a routine call. But the sound grew closer, and within moments a pair of police cars turned onto the street he was walking down. The man slowed his pace, keeping the dog close, sensing that something was about to happen. A voice over a megaphone called out, instructing him to stop and put the dog down. The man froze for a second, taken aback. He looked down at his companion, who tilted its head slightly, sensing tension. He knew the dog would obey his command, but he also knew how quickly things could spiral out of control. He raised his hand slowly, trying to appear calm and non-threatening. His heart beat steadily, but his mind raced with every possible outcome. Years of training had taught him to anticipate the worst, to be ready for anything. The officers approached cautiously, their hands hovering near their weapons. The man tried to explain, his voice calm but firm. "It's okay. The dog is friendly. It's trained. Please don't shoot." He repeated this several times, but the officers hesitated, unsure of what they were dealing with. To them, it was just a man with a large dog, responding nervously to their commands. They didn't know the bond between the man and his dog, nor did they realize the intelligence and discipline behind every movement the dog made. All they saw was a situation that could turn dangerous at any moment. Suddenly, the dog barked once, a sharp, protective sound. It wasn't aggressive, but it was enough to make the officers flinch. They were on edge, and in that split second of misunderstanding, the unthinkable happened. A shot rang out. The man's stomach dropped as he saw the dog fall to the ground. Time seemed to freeze, and the world became unbearably quiet except for the ringing in his ears. The dog, his constant companion, his protector, was lifeless before him. The man fell to his knees, horror and disbelief mixing with a surge of emotions he had spent decades controlling. He tried to speak, tried to explain, but the words caught in his throat. The officers moved forward cautiously, unsure of what to do next, while the man's heart ached with the loss that no one else could understand. This was more than a pet. It was a part of him, a piece of his soul that had walked through countless missions, survived danger, and remained loyal in every circumstance. Now in a quiet town that had offered him peace, that loyalty was gone in a moment of chaos. The man's training kicked in despite his grief. He controlled his immediate reactions, staying calm on the surface, but inside a storm was raging. His mind replayed every memory with the dog, every mission where they had relied on each other, every quiet evening in this very town. He could feel the weight of injustice pressing down on him, yet he did not lash out. Years of discipline taught him restraint even in moments like this. He stayed still, his hands steady, his voice finally finding strength. "It didn't have to happen. You didn't understand," he said softly, almost to himself, almost to the dog. The officers began to realize the gravity of what had just occurred. One of them noticed the tattoos on his arm. Marks of military service, symbols that hinted at something extraordinary. Questions were asked, explanations mumbled, but the man remained silent, letting the moment speak for itself. The dog's life could not be returned, and no words could fill the emptiness that followed. He slowly stood up, his eyes never leaving the body of his loyal companion, and the officers stepped back, unsure how to handle someone whose presence alone seemed to command attention. News began to spread quickly in the small town. Rumors circulated about the man with the dog, about the incident that had ended so tragically. Some neighbors expressed sympathy, others whispered about the danger, but none truly understood the magnitude of what had been lost. Meanwhile, someone familiar with military matters recognized the signs, the posture, the quiet control, the subtle strength. They approached the authorities later that day, quietly informing them that the man was no ordinary resident. He was a Delta Force commander, a highly trained operative who had completed missions that few could comprehend. The realization struck the department with shock and disbelief. They had acted without knowing the identity of the person in front of them, and the consequences weighed heavily. Despite the revelation, the man did not seek vengeance or confrontation. He allowed the officers to understand their mistake, allowed the town to process what had happened, but he retreated into silence. Grief consumed him in private moments in the quiet of his home, where the absence of his companion was most painfully felt. He walked through the rooms, noting the places where the dog had slept, the spots by the window where it watched the world, the garden where it had chased butterflies. Every memory was a reminder of what had been taken, yet also of what had been shared. The bond had been real, and in that he found a measure of comfort. Neighbors began to notice subtle changes in him. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and the absence of the dog was palpable. Those who had once waved or exchanged small talk found themselves greeted with polite nods instead. The man no longer took long walks in the mornings, instead staying home reflecting on the loss and the fragility of life. He did not speak openly about the incident, but his demeanor communicated the weight of his grief. The dog had been more than a companion. It had been a part of his identity, a reminder of loyalty and trust that few ever experience. At night, he would sit by the window staring into the darkness, recalling the mornings they had shared, the quiet streets, the soft rustle of leaves as the dog trotted beside him. Memories of the missions he had completed long ago seemed to blur with the present, and for the first time, he understood the depth of what he had lost in a world that did not know him. Each day became a struggle to maintain the composure he had always relied on, to keep the grief from overwhelming him entirely. Yet he survived as he always had, because resilience was in his nature. In the quiet moments, he began to reflect on life and mortality in ways he had not allowed himself before. He realized that the dog had taught him lessons about trust, loyalty, and unconditional love that even the most intense missions could never convey. It had been a connection unlike any other, a living being who understood him in ways humans often could not. The absence of that connection left a void that could not be filled, and he knew that life in the town would never be the same. Yet he also understood that he could not let grief consume him entirely. He had to continue for himself, for the memory of the dog, and for the lessons it had imparted. The man found himself wandering through old habits, touching the places the dog had frequented, whispering the words he could never say aloud. He began keeping a journal, writing about their time together, the routines they shared, the moments of quiet joy, and even the challenges they had faced. The act of writing became a form of therapy, a way to honor the life that had been ended abruptly, and to process the depth of emotion that surged through him daily. In these pages, the dog lived on, and in doing so, so did the man's sense of humanity. As the town slowly became aware of the true nature of the man they had known only as a quiet neighbor, respect and caution grew in equal measure. The incident with the dog had been a tragic mistake, but it had also revealed a hidden layer of strength and dignity. People began to see him differently, understanding that the quiet man who walked his dog each morning had a past filled with bravery and sacrifice. The realization brought a mix of awe and humility to those around him, though they still could not fully grasp the emotional bond that had been broken so abruptly. The man continued his life with a new awareness of fragility and impermanence. Every step outside, every interaction with neighbors, every quiet evening on the porch reminded him that life could change in an instant. He embraced the moments he had left, finding solace in simple routines, in the comfort of solitude, and in the memories that no one could take away. The dog had been more than a partner. It had been a teacher, a guardian, and a friend. Its absence was a wound, but one that he carried with honor, a reminder of the love and loyalty that defined their shared life. In private, he began to prepare for ways to honor his companion, to ensure that its legacy would not be forgotten. He thought about small memorials, about sharing the story with those who could understand, about the quiet impact a single loyal life could have on another. Each thought was a step toward healing, a way to channel grief into remembrance. He knew that the officers who had made the mistake could not undo the past, but he also understood that dwelling in anger would not serve him. Instead, he focused on the lessons learned, the bond that had been shared, and the quiet strength he had always carried within himself. The days turned into weeks, and slowly the town began to accept the tragedy, while the man continued to navigate his own path through grief. He maintained his distance from most people, preferring the solace of quiet streets and familiar trails, yet he also began to find subtle ways to honor his companion. Whether it was pausing in a favorite spot, tending to the garden as the dog once had, or quietly sharing stories with those he trusted, he kept the memory alive. The bond had not been broken. It had only shifted, moving from physical presence to enduring memory. Though the incident had left a mark that could never be erased, the man's resilience remained unshaken. He carried the lessons of his past and the love of his companion into each new day, finding ways to live with both loss and gratitude. In the quiet of the town, in the soft light of morning and the fading glow of evening, he discovered that even in tragedy, there was a way forward. He could continue, he could remember, and he could honor the life that had touched him so profoundly. And in that, there was hope, a quiet promise that even the deepest pain could be transformed into strength and purpose. The man tried to go about his days as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Every corner of his home, every familiar street in the town, reminded him of the dog that had been his constant companion. The quiet mornings they had shared on walks, the way the dog had curled at his feet while he read, the gentle nudge it gave when he seemed sad, all of it was gone. The emptiness weighed heavily, and yet he refused to let it crush him entirely. He had survived far worse in his life, and he knew that he could endure this too. Though the pain was different, sharper, and more personal. People in the town had begun to talk about the incident, some with sympathy, others with confusion. They had learned of the officer's mistake, but few understood the magnitude of what had been lost. To the man, the dog had been a partner in life and survival. It was trained for situations most could never imagine. It had saved him countless times, and it had given him a sense of normalcy in a world that had always demanded vigilance. Losing it so suddenly left a void that no one else could fill. As days passed, an unexpected realization came to the authorities. They began to investigate the man's background, prompted by a veteran in the town who had recognized certain signs of his military service. The authorities discovered that he was not just any former soldier. He was a Delta Force commander, a man who had led some of the most sensitive missions in history. Classified operations, clandestine battles, moments that would remain secrets for a lifetime. All of it pointed to a level of skill, courage, and discipline that the world had rarely seen. The weight of their error hit hard. They had acted without understanding the person in front of them, without realizing the significance of their actions. Despite this revelation, the man did not demand recognition or retaliation. He remained silent, a quiet presence in the town, letting others wrestle with guilt and responsibility. Inside, however, the grief burned. Each night he relived the moments before the shot, the sound of the gun, the collapse of his faithful companion. He remembered the dog's soft eyes, its gentle nudge, the way it had always known when he needed comfort. Those memories were both a blessing and a curse, bringing warmth and sorrow in equal measure. In the quiet of his home, he began to take small steps toward healing. He set up a corner with the dog's favorite blanket, toys, and collar. It was a small shrine, a way to honor the life that had been taken. He would sit there, touching the objects, whispering words that no one else would hear, recalling the loyalty and love that had defined their time together. This act of remembrance became a daily ritual, a way to keep the dog's spirit alive even in its absence. Neighbors who had once thought of him as distant began to see subtle changes. He was still quiet, still reserved, but there was a depth to his demeanor now that was palpable. Some approached him cautiously, offering condolences, trying to understand, but he did not speak much. Words could not capture what had been lost, and he had learned that silence often conveyed more than explanation ever could. He accepted the gestures with grace, nodding politely, but reserved the true weight of his grief for private moments. At the same time, the man started to notice the impact the dog had had on his own emotional well-being. It had not just been a companion. It had been a guide through the complexities of human emotion. The dog had sensed his moods, adjusted its behavior, and offered comfort without judgment. The absence of that presence left a gap that he felt acutely in every interaction, in every quiet hour of reflection. He realized that part of his recovery would involve finding ways to channel this loss into purpose, to honor the loyalty that had been shown to him so freely. He began to explore ways to help others in similar situations. Veterans in the town, men and women who carried invisible scars from missions and battles, became a quiet focus for his attention. He would visit shelters and community centers, offering support in subtle ways, sharing experiences without revealing too much of his past. His presence alone was comforting to those who had lived through trauma, even if they did not know the full extent of his history. The lessons learned from his time with the dog, patience, observation, loyalty, and calm in the face of uncertainty, became tools he could offer others. Occasionally, he would encounter reporters or curious townspeople seeking answers about the incident. He was careful with his words, offering only what was necessary, never allowing himself to be drawn into sensationalism or controversy. He had learned that attention could be dangerous, that exposure could invite complications he no longer wanted. The focus of his life remained on quiet recovery, on honoring his companion, and on helping others in ways that were subtle but meaningful. One afternoon, he visited the park where the incident had occurred. The place was quiet, the sun filtering through the trees, and he could almost hear the echo of the past. He walked slowly, recalling the dog's excitement as they had explored the area together. The way it had bounded ahead, then returned to check on him. The memory was bittersweet, filled with joy and loss intertwined. He sat on a bench, letting the quiet envelop him, and allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. Tears came, but they were not signs of weakness. They were proof of love, of connection, of a bond that could not be broken even by tragedy. In these moments, he reflected on the broader lessons life had taught him. He had seen death and destruction in ways that few could comprehend, and yet the loss of this single loyal companion cut deeper than most dangers he had faced. It was a reminder that the heart could be vulnerable even to those who had trained their bodies and minds to withstand the harshest conditions. He understood that grief was not a weakness but a measure of the depth of connection, a testament to the value of what had been shared. He began to document his thoughts, writing in a journal late into the nights. The words flowed slowly at first, hesitant, as if the act of writing could somehow bring the dog back. But gradually the entries became a way to process the pain, to honor the memories, and to preserve the lessons learned. Each page was a tribute, a silent acknowledgement of loyalty and love, and a means to carry forward the essence of what had been lost. Through writing, he found a path to continue living without forgetting, to embrace grief while transforming it into purpose. Evenings became a sacred time. He would light a small candle in the corner of the room that had belonged to the dog, sitting quietly as the flame flickered. The gentle glow reminded him of the warmth the dog had brought into his life, the light it had offered in moments of darkness. He found solace in these rituals, small but meaningful acts that preserved the memory and offered a measure of healing. It was a slow process, and some days were harder than others, but the routine provided structure and comfort in a world that had suddenly become uncertain. As weeks passed, the town slowly came to understand the gravity of what had occurred. The officers involved faced internal reviews and accountability measures, and the community recognized the tragedy for what it was, a moment of misjudgment with irreversible consequences. The man, however, remained focused on private healing. Public acknowledgement was secondary to the work he was doing within himself, the quiet steps he was taking to honor the dog and to continue living a life that reflected the values they had shared. He also began to consider the future, the legacy he wanted to leave. The dog had taught him lessons that were invaluable: loyalty, courage, and the importance of presence. He realized that he could honor these lessons by helping others, by training dogs to assist veterans, and by sharing his knowledge in ways that preserved the bond between human and animal. Even in the absence of the companion who had shared his life, he could ensure that its influence endured, shaping the lives of others and offering comfort where it was most needed. The process was gradual. He would spend time at local shelters, observing and assisting with dogs, teaching basic commands and helping to pair them with individuals who could benefit from their companionship. Each interaction was a reminder of the bond he had lost and the impact it had had on his life. He approached this work with patience and care, understanding that the lessons from his own experience could provide guidance and support for others navigating their own challenges. In doing so, he found a measure of purpose, a way to transform grief into meaningful action. At home, he maintained routines that honored his past life and his companion. Morning walks were replaced with thoughtful reflection. Gardening became a meditative practice, and writing continued to be a nightly ritual. The house, once filled with the energy of a loyal dog, was quieter now, but it was still a sanctuary. Every object, every corner held memories, and the man carried them with a sense of reverence. The bond had not been broken. It had merely shifted, becoming a guiding presence in his continued journey. Through it all, he remained calm, disciplined, and quietly strong. The loss could have consumed him, but instead, he chose resilience. He understood that the dog's life, though ended abruptly, had left an indelible mark on his own. It had shaped him, taught him, and provided a depth of connection that would guide him for the rest of his life. The man had seen horrors and faced dangers that few could imagine. But the love and loyalty of a single companion had left a scar that was both painful and beautiful. In the stillness of the night, he often sat by the window looking out at the quiet town, reflecting on the events that had changed his life forever. The absence of his companion was keenly felt, yet he also recognized the strength he had gained. He had faced loss, confronted grief, and continued forward with dignity and purpose. The lessons of patience, loyalty, and resilience that the dog had embodied were now his to carry forward, shaping his actions, his interactions, and his understanding of life. Through these reflections, he began to appreciate the fragile beauty of existence. Life could change in an instant, and the bonds we form are precious and fleeting. The man understood that while the dog's life had ended, the impact it had made was permanent. Every step he took, every quiet moment of reflection, and every act of kindness or support he offered to others was informed by the love and loyalty he had experienced. It was a legacy that could not be erased, a testament to the depth of connection and the enduring power of companionship. As part 3 of his story unfolded, the man found ways to navigate grief with grace, to honor the memory of a loyal companion, and to transform loss into a quiet, enduring strength. Though the pain remained, he had discovered that resilience, compassion, and purpose could coexist with sorrow. The lessons learned from the dog's life and the bond they had shared continued to guide him, shaping a path forward in a world that had become both richer and more poignant through the experience of loss, love, and remembrance. Life had taken on a new rhythm for the man, one defined not by missions and danger but by quiet reflection and the small, meaningful actions he could control. Each day he moved through the town with a measured calm, his presence understated yet commanding in a way that others could not quite explain. He had learned to live with the absence of his dog, the companion who had shared his life through danger and calm alike, and he now carried its lessons into every interaction and decision. The town noticed a change in him, a deep serenity coupled with a subtle strength that drew quiet respect from those who observed him from a distance. He began dedicating more time to helping others, especially veterans who had been through their own battles and were struggling to reintegrate into civilian life. These visits were quiet, unannounced, and unassuming. He would sit in community centers, talk gently with those who wanted to talk, and simply listen to those who needed to be heard. Many veterans found solace in his presence without knowing who he had been or what he had accomplished in the past. His ability to remain calm, to respond with patience rather than judgment, and to offer guidance without preaching was a balm to people who were used to walls and silence. In these moments, he felt a sense of purpose that partially eased the aching absence of his companion. Sometimes, he would bring along a small rescued dog from a shelter, training it subtly in the ways he had trained his own companion. The animals quickly sensed his confidence and care, and the veterans responded to the dogs as well, forming bonds that reminded him of what he had lost. While no animal could replace the loyal companion who had been with him for years, each small success and each smile from a veteran offered a glimmer of hope that he could transform grief into something meaningful. These moments became a bridge between his past and the present, a way to honor the memory of his dog while also serving the living. He also began a quiet campaign to raise awareness about service animals for veterans. Working behind the scenes, he contacted trainers, shelters, and local organizations, sharing insights on how dogs could assist with emotional support, anxiety, and trauma. He had no desire for recognition, only results. His knowledge and disciplined approach ensured that the program ran smoothly, and slowly, people began to notice the difference in the lives of those who participated. Though he remained in the background, the impact of his efforts became visible, leaving an enduring mark on the community and offering tangible proof that compassion, discipline, and loyalty could coexist. In his own home, he maintained rituals that honored the dog he had lost. A corner of his living room remained a quiet memorial, with the dog's collar and favorite toys placed carefully, and a small framed photo showing a joyful moment from years past. Each evening he would light a candle, sit quietly and reflect on the loyalty, love, and companionship that had shaped his life. These moments were private, unobserved yet deeply significant, offering a sense of closure even as he grappled with lingering grief. He found that acknowledging the pain and embracing the memories allowed him to move forward rather than be consumed by sorrow. The man's interactions with the townspeople subtly changed as well. Those who had been hesitant to approach him now found him approachable and warm, yet always reserved as if he carried a depth that could not be fully reached by casual conversation. When children waved or dogs barked from nearby yards, he would smile softly, acknowledging the small joys of life without drawing attention to himself. These gestures, simple yet genuine, conveyed a humanity that transcended his quiet demeanor. And slowly, the town began to accept him not just as a neighbor, but as someone who had endured and survived more than most could imagine. Despite the progress, there were days when grief resurfaced with intensity, a familiar scent, the sight of a dog resembling his companion, or even a quiet street that echoed memories of their walks would trigger a surge of longing. In those moments he allowed himself to feel fully, recognizing that grief was a reflection of love and loyalty. He did not fight it. Instead, he let it pass naturally, understanding that acknowledging pain was a necessary step toward healing. Over time, these moments became less frequent and less sharp, a testament to the resilience that had always been part of him. He also found solace in nature. He began taking walks along quiet trails outside of town, often at dawn when the light was soft and the world still waking. These walks were solitary, but he carried with him the memory of his companion, imagining its presence beside him, sensing the environment with alert intelligence. The exercise, the quiet, and the connection to past experiences became meditative, helping him to process both grief and gratitude. He discovered that honoring the memory of his companion did not require physical presence. It was a mindset, a way of carrying the lessons learned forward. Work with the veterans continued to grow, and he became a quiet mentor for many. He taught not only practical skills but also emotional awareness, patience, and resilience. The veterans respected his calm demeanor and subtle authority, even without knowing the details of his own life. The impact was profound: small changes in confidence, a sense of hope, and the beginnings of emotional healing in those who had long carried burdens in silence. The man found satisfaction in these successes, a quiet joy that reminded him that even in loss he could create meaning. At home he maintained simple routines that provided structure and stability. Breakfast and coffee each morning, a walk through familiar streets, writing in his journal, and quiet meditation became the anchors of his day. These routines were not rigid. They were reminders that life continued, that the past shaped but did not define him, and that he had the power to make each day purposeful. The dog's absence was always present, but these rituals allowed him to honor the bond they had shared without being overwhelmed by it. He also began recording stories of his experiences in subtle ways, not for fame or recognition but as a personal archive. The stories were about the lessons learned, the bonds formed, and the resilience required in both military operations and civilian life. Though he did not share them widely, he knew that someday they might serve as guidance or inspiration for others facing loss or challenges. The act of writing provided clarity and calm, a way to process emotions while preserving memories in a tangible form. Community events sometimes reminded him of what had been lost. Festivals, fairs, or gatherings with dogs in attendance brought flashes of longing, but he faced them with composed reflection rather than despair. Occasionally, he would offer quiet assistance or guidance at these events, helping with animal behavior, security, or logistics, always in the background. People began to notice the quiet effectiveness of his presence, though none fully understood the depth of his history. The respect he garnered was unspoken yet profound, a subtle acknowledgement of his capability and character. Even in moments of solitude, he found ways to honor his companion's memory through small acts of care. He visited animal shelters, provided supplies, or spent time helping train dogs, all done quietly without fanfare. Each action reinforced the lessons of loyalty, trust, and patience that the dog had taught him. The act of giving back became a bridge between past grief and present purpose, a tangible way to transform loss into constructive, positive energy. His internal reflections often focused on gratitude and perspective, He understood that life was fragile, that connections were precious, and that even short-lived bonds could leave lasting impact. The dog had exemplified these truths, offering unwavering loyalty and love. By remembering and honoring these qualities, he reinforced the values that guided him, not only for his own well-being but also as an example for those he encountered. He discovered that the strongest legacy is not in recognition or fame, but in the quiet influence one has on others, and the lives touched through acts of compassion. Time continued, and the man's grief softened into a steady, reflective presence. The pain of loss remained, but it no longer dominated his every thought. Instead, he carried it with quiet dignity, a reminder of the depth of love and connection that had defined his life. The lessons from his companion guided his interactions, decisions, and contributions, shaping a life that honored both memory and ongoing purpose. He found balance in solitude, reflection, and meaningful action, blending the past with the present in a way that allowed for healing. In the evenings, he would often sit on his porch, the sun dipping low and casting long shadows across the quiet streets. He reflected on the days gone by, the moments of joy, the lessons learned, and the losses endured. In those quiet moments, he could almost feel his companion beside him, a comforting presence that transcended physical absence. The memory was alive in every small ritual, every act of kindness, and every thoughtful interaction with others. Through these reflections, he found peace not by forgetting, but by integrating the bond they had shared into the ongoing narrative of his life. The man had learned to live with the invisible weight of absence, transforming grief into reflection, purpose, and resilience. The dog's memory became a guiding principle in his daily life, reminding him of the values of loyalty, trust, and steadfastness. Through quiet mentorship, meaningful action, and personal reflection, he continued to honor the life of his companion while finding ways to enrich the lives of others. The tragedy of loss became a catalyst for growth, shaping a life that was not defined solely by pain but by the depth of love, the strength of character, and the enduring power of connection. Even as part 4 of his journey unfolded, he remained steadfast in his commitment to living with dignity, compassion, and purpose. The bond he had shared with his dog, though ended in the physical world, continued to shape his actions, choices, and interactions. In every step forward, in every quiet moment of reflection, he carried the lessons of loyalty, love, and resilience, ensuring that the life of his companion would continue to inspire and guide him. And in that he discovered a form of healing that was both gentle and enduring, a way to move forward while honoring the past with unwavering grace.